Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Death by Adaptation podcast, Clapper's monthly book club where we talk about classic novels, older, newer novels, and all the cinematic adaptations that have flourished from them. And I'm always joined by the good Ewan Gleadow. How are you doing, Ewan?
It's rather apt that this podcast is called Death by Adaptation, because I think me and you both, we do feel a bit like death today.
Yes.
I'm not hungover, I'm just very tired from drinking. And you're just, I don't know what's the matter with you.
Two different nights recording podcasts for Clapper. I got a flu shot a couple days ago, but I was also coming down with something because I woke up in the morning. I was like, I feel like shit. Not so much coughing, but just where you're feeling feverish, but you don't actually have the fever. But it's not COVID. It's not anything specific. But yeah, it's been a rough couple of days, all things considered, and we have reached the point where, the episode today, some of those adaptations did almost kill us. So the title is very apt.
It's been a good day and a good time of prep for things and art that will kill us with their mediocrity.
Yeah,
I'll just throw yourself into the deep end there. I didn't like either of these.
It's okay. We always have the weirdest combos. We have the weirdest combos, and I have to say, the titles that we're talking about today, just for clarity's sake, are Great Expectations by Charles Dickens and Red Dragon by Thomas Harris.
Yes.
Both interesting choices. I picked Red Dragon because I did a whole massive Michael Mann retrospective earlier this year. I was like, I have Red Dragon just sitting on my shelf and I've never read it. Might as well do it for the podcast. And I don't know what brought you to choose Great Expectations.
It was one of the many books I'd gotten from that free shop. I was like, I'm going to have to read this eventually. May as well do it for a podcast about Red Dragon.
It's a good combo, man.
It is. We always come up with great combos. What was it? American Psycho and Silence, and then Fear and Loathing and Jane Eyre. It's...
We have to keep it up.
We do. We've got
this is what the audience wants.
This is what they want to see. Us two physically deteriorating as we get iller and iller talking about books that we did not enjoy.
And speaking of books we did not enjoy, why don't we start with Great Expectations?
The night all of my dreams came true. And like all happy endings, it was a tragedy of my own device. For I'd succeeded. I had cut myself loose from Joe, from the past, from the gulf, from poverty. I had invented myself. I'd done it cruelly, but I'd done it. I was free.
I did it! I did it! I am a wild success! I sold them all my paintings! You don't have to be embarrassed by me anymore. I'm rich! Isn't that what you wanted? Huh? Isn't it great? Are we happy now? Don't you understand that everything I do it for you. Anything that might be special in me is you.
Ewan, take it away. What's this book about?
I'll be honest with you.
Charles Dickens story.
I've read it and I've seen the two bloody film adaptations. I couldn't tell you what it was about. So, from what I can gather, from all I can remember, because I'll be honest with you, my brain is pickled by alcohol these days. It's the book essentially is in 3 acts. You get the life of Pip. He's an orphan. He's down on his luck in his first act. The second act sees him, picking it up a bit, and the third act is that natural progression from rags to riches. It's that type of story, but it's written in a period where a rags to riches story wasn't really popularized. It wasn't commercially viable to do this, whereas now you see stuff like Richie Rich or any sort of rags to riches story. Richie Rich, for some reason, is the only one I know.
That's what that comes to mind.
I like that film. That's the only reason I can think of it. But it's
a classic. It is a classic.
It is... It falls under that remit of books I would put with Jane Eyre and Sense and Sensibility, that sort of thing, Pride and Prejudice. The thematics and the iconography of a period piece are phenomenal. They're really interesting, and I do fancy the sort of the iconography that's persistent with that genre. However, it is very much dependent on how much you can connect with the characters, and I think Charles Dickens with Great Expectations really struggles here, because by all means, Pip is not a bad character, but the people around him, like Miss Havisham and Herbert Pocket, I don't care. I really don't care, and it's not as if I'm not trying to sort of engage with them. It's just they have nothing. It's all very dependent on feeding into Pip, and there's nothing wrong with that. Pip is essentially the central character for a very simplistic 3-act structure, and that's fine. Dickens's prose is well-meaning and it's well-intentioned. I don't think it's particularly incredible. And that might be because this was my first Charles Dickens, and I think that's some sort of cardinal sin that I didn't start with, like David Copperfield or Oliver Twist or something.
Well, so let's talk about Dickens for a second, because this was not my first Charles Dickens novel. I think I mentioned it in one of the previous chats that we had, but I had a massive classic binge when I was younger, because library, I was just in the mood for reading. And one of the authors that was in every single library, of course, it's Charles Dickens, like all of his novels. And I was always intrigued by Great Expectations, but I didn't read that one. I did read, I think, A Tale of Two Cities. I read The Christmas Carol and a whole bunch of other Christmas stories that he wrote in a collection. And I did read David Copperfield when I was 11 or 12. Oh, it's I was young. So I was it's probably too much for a kid my age, especially reading it in Italian. It was still easier than in English, but still. I was excited to read Great Expectations because it felt kind of like a redemption, finally, I can give Charles Dickens a second chance. Maybe I would actually enjoy him, especially if I read it in the native tongue, in the native language of the novel. And after 100 pages, I was almost ready to quit. I was like, this is hard. I just don't like Dickens. And I think it's kind of like what you were saying. It is the Great Expectations specifically. It is one of those classic stories that helped shape this type of narrative. But boy, it does not need to be this long.
Yeah, it's I don't get why it was so long. And I never like to sort of comment on, why is this so long? Why is this so short? I've never really backed that argument. In rare cases, I would, and I think Great Expectations is one of those cases where it's it's a lot of detail, a lot of description, but where's the actual meat behind? Where's the sustenance? Where's the we want to see the cogs behind the curtain, and there's nothing there.
I came to the realization while watching the 1946 adaptation by David Lean. I was like, I get it now.
Yeah,
this is a soap opera.
It's essentially, yeah. It's if you stretched it out to 20 episodes, you'd have a decent season. But
I think it could work actually, as a miniseries.
I don't think it helps that it's drawn out. I do think that's the biggest issue with it. But I understand why it's drawn out. Where there's a lot of characters, so by all means there is a lot to describe. There is a lot happening to young Pip and his merry little antics, and we've got to describe those. I will give Dickens credit. It's better than Alfonso Cuaron's adaptation of his work. Loose adaptation, I should say. Loose in the sense of, it's essentially a different film.
It's a bastardization, without meaning to be.
It's an odd one.
Yes. Well, because there have been many, many adaptations, and I know there was one in 2012. I almost watched it in the cinema when it came out. I think it has Ralph Fiennes and Helena Bonham Carter in the film, but I missed that one, and so we decided to talk about those two for the podcast. And the David Lean one, I mean, easily the superior one. It is very reminiscent of the Jane Eyre 1943 movie that we watched. It's very much of its time. It's a British production. It's an adaptation of a novel. They changed some things around to make it a bit leaner in the pacing. But what works about this is, of course, the man behind the camera. It's David Lean. It is a very stagey production, for sure. but when he puts his effort in, like when he's trying to make a film, when people are not just talking but things are happening, it's like, oh wow, this is great. And you mentioned the iconography and the way just Dickens brings to life the world, as boring as some of the descriptions might be. It is very effective in the visual form because you just see it. You don't have to spend 5 pages on the cobblestones of London and all of that. It's very straight and to the point. And in a way, I would almost say it's superior to the novel. Because I was like, you know
Yeah,
what? It's removing so much fat. It's just going into what actually matters about the narrative and the symbolism. Because there's a whole lot of themes in this one, but we'll get into it.
I
But
think
yeah, what
that's
did you think?
I'd agree with you on that. I think the best
Mm,
adaptation is the David Lean one. He strips it down to very simplistic prose. He hits all the right notes in like a very stuffy of its time production. And I really like David Lean. I think he's a
mm.
fantastic director, and I think that's a sentiment echoed by essentially everyone. So it's not that special of a thing to say. But he adapts it very well. He
Mhm.
knows what the right aspects are to focus on, not from a technical perspective, but a story perspective. He knows what to sort of get rid of. He omits quite a bit, and he sort of just streamlines it. And I mean, as you said, it's the people behind the camera that are the most important part for that film. It's the opening scene in the graveyard when it pans and he's going down the docks, and it looks phenomenal. And you'd expect nothing less
Yeah.
from a David Lean production. It's a shame that Dickens could not use imagery like that, and bless him, he tries, but he fails. I mean, the
Could have
only
made a comic
encounter,
version. Just a
they,
comic book version of Great
yeah,
Expectations.
like they did with Fear and Loathing, that'd be easier. Um,
Mm.
but I think that, I mean, as far as my relationship with Charles Dickens goes, the only time I've ever experienced him in any form before this, I probably watched the Oliver Twist film from the '60s, like when I was a kid.
Hmm.
But when I
The
used to
musical
watch,
one,
yeah,
Oliver
yeah,
exclamation mark.
that's the one, Oliver exclamation mark, a bastardized rendition of a book I have not read. Um, he was also, when I was young enough to watch Doctor Who, because Doctor Who is for children. He was in an episode of Doctor Who,
Okay.
and he fought off Welsh ghosts called Gelth. Um, and
Uh,
I'm pretty sure he set fire to one of them. I don't quite know, but
I'll have to watch that one then.
it's an odd
It's
one. It's
just
got
like it sounds like it.
it is far more entertaining than Great Expectations. But I
Doesn't
think,
take much, to be honest.
well, yeah, we found ourselves in a nice balance between one of the adaptations is stronger than the book, and one of the adaptations is just
Much weaker.
mesmerizingly shit. It's horrendous, and I think a lot of that comes down to the modernization of it, which is both inevitable and possibly the greatest sin of all.
Yeah, like in the 90s, there was this massive resurgence of adapting classic novels again, but for an American market, because all those ones we talked about, Jane Eyre, we're talking about the David Lean Great Expectations. All those were primarily for British audiences, who were like, that's where the novel was actually set, that's where it was written, and someone for some reason thought, what would be great if Great Expectations was set in Florida. Just think about that. It's a genius choice. People are actually going to see themselves in the narrative now, and it's not going to be called Pip. It's going to be called Finn because it's more modern. This was a troubled production, or
Yes,
very
yeah.
troubled.
Um,
And I love that Ethan Hawke, is the protagonist in the film, like he realized very early on that this was going to be absolute shit, and you can tell
yeah.
because he just doesn't care after a while.
Oh, he couldn't give
He's
a
just
shit.
zones
It's
out. Whenever he's in New York, I think those were shot later. He's just zoned out throughout.
it's the weird thing I think that film has, and it gets itself off on the wrong foot when you've got Ethan Hawke, his narration over the top, and he says, "I am not going to tell the story the way it happened." Well, what are you going to tell us? Because what you've told us for the past 2 hours is nonsense. Like, I don't get what they were setting themselves up for. Like, I'm genuinely quite surprised they didn't kill Cuaron's career dead. Like, I know it was early days for the guy, and he picked himself back up in the 2000s because his run of films in that time was phenomenal. But
Yeah.
this is just a bad adaptation. There are bad adaptations. There are always bad adaptations, like the Ten a Penny. But this one, it just sticks out like a sore thumb. I think it's the mixture of old Robert De Niro on a subway in the arms of Ethan Hawke. I don't think it helps that Pulp are on the soundtrack for whatever reason. They're my favourite band, and they have no place in Great Expectations. So the song that's used, so it's when Ethan Hawke is painting Gwyneth Paltrow in the apartment, which just looks grotty and horrendous. I would not take my shoes off in that home. I don't know what she thinks she's doing with that. That song
Living
playing,
dangerously.
it's like a very odd B-side for Pulp, because the same year this film came out, they'd also pitched a song to the James Bond film Tomorrow Never Dies. They were really trying to get their foot in the door with Hollywood productions, and this is the only one they could get. And you can see why, because it's just grotty and it's like really seedy. It's just completely over sexualized. Like when you read the book, it's like
Man.
so like I don't know what they were doing.
This film is horny as fuck. Like legit. It's just when it's okay. So you have the whole character of Miss Havisham, who's this elderly lady. She's stuck in the past because she didn't get she was stood up on the altar, and she's become obsessed with that day when she didn't get married, and so she's living in a decrepit mansion. All of the clocks are always stuck at the time of the wedding when it was supposed to happen. It's very blatant symbolism of not being able to let go of the past and all of that from Dickens. But I mean,
Yeah.
it works in the context.
But that's
it works.
yeah, it works in the context, but in practice, it's really simple and quite terrible.
Yeah, well, yeah, and you're watching the David Lean version, and I don't remember the actress name, but it's got this very gothic atmosphere. Like it's beautifully shot, the black and white, the contrast, the flames
Yeah,
from the fire just lighting the room up. It's wonderful. And then in the Alfonso Cuaron version, Anne Bancroft appears singing and dancing, and I just wanted to scream and run away. Like I don't know how the child just stood there. It was scary,
I,
like properly scary. I don't know, like all of the actors in that film. I don't know what they were doing. They're on different levels, different planes. And Anne Bancroft, God rest her soul, like she was brilliant in many movies, but this is not one of them.
it's
This
no
is-
The Graduate, is it?
It's not. It's not.
I think the issue is like you have such a strong casting. Like you've got Chris Cooper just rocking up as Ethan Hawke's dad, and it's
His uncle,
his uncle. Sorry,
Uncle Joe.
it's so difficult to understand what's going on in this film because most of it is sort of just taking this cast for granted. It's Ethan Hawke and Gwyneth Paltrow in their young sort of, oh, I'm about to go and do Before Sunrise and stuff like that stage, and Gwyneth Paltrow's about to do like, I think she'd just come off the back of winning an Oscar or was about to. Shakespeare
It was-
in Love might have been 2002 or so. She was
I think
close to
maybe
that
earlier.
stage.
It was the same year.
Blimey.
Same year. Oh.
Same year she won an Oscar, she did this. And it's, I appreciate the quote by Ethan Hawke where he said, he stated that nobody gave a shit about anything but Titanic for about 9 months after, particularly another romance. And it's like, I don't think that's the issue with this film.
But I
there's a-
can see that though. That's something I was thinking about because they're trying to push the romance so hard.
yeah,
And that's kind of actually something that I would bring back to the book as well, which is interesting.
yeah,
Because Great Expectations is known as a big romance. I think primarily because and due to this adaptation, the 1998 one. Because originally, like the entire concept of the story is this kid falls in love, like Pip falls in love with Estella, but he never actually gets to know her and is more infatuated with just her beauty than anything else. She's not a real character in any way. She ends up getting married with someone else. Like he's going to live his own life just alone, but he's kind of happy with that. He never got to be with the woman he loved, but he managed to do so many other things. And he was always good-hearted, and he always helped people out. He became a snob, and he understood the error of his ways, like all of that stuff. And it's interesting that Dickens originally had a different ending, where they were just kind of going to meet up again, but not get together. just kind of go on separate paths. It's bringing closure to the story, and I think that's a very poignant, because it's not making it a cliched. But in the end, love triumphed. And then you watch, then they had him change the ending, and then you watch this movie, and it's like, but in the end, love triumphed. It's like, sure, okay,
And
whatever.
I don't agree with the idea that love triumphs. I think it's such a cop out, and I think it's why I wasn't keen on the book. It's like you can, it's not that you can see it's coming. It's just you spend so long with these characters and expect it to go somewhere, and
Mm-hmm.
you know it's going towards that, and they lived happily ever after type thing. It's how you get there that's more important. And when you've got just the same sort of blanket tones you'd use in anything else, it's really hard to care. And I think my big issue with Great Expectations as a movie and the book as well is that it's all well and good having the same sort of pointers here and there. It's like all well and good having the same plot here or the same character there.
Mm-hmm.
It's the lack of variety. It's the lack of composure, and it really, the book for me falls apart in that third act because we now know who Pip is, and it's not going to evolve from there. That's who we're stuck with, and I don't think Dickens makes any sort of confident effort to expand on him from there.
Mm-hmm.
And we're stuck with a character who is likable, I suppose, at best, for a good couple hundred pages of just him mulling about, complaining, and being like, "Oh, I'm Mrs. Stella, boo, you know."
So
Come on.
being a Charles Dickens character.
Yes, essentially, it's a hard knock life.
Yeah, and and especially in the novel, that's the only real praise I can give to the 1998 adaptation. Outside of like Chris Cooper is usually the best one because he's just nice, he's just
Yeah,
good. It's like, you know what, Chris Cooper, I always like you. You never disappoint. Out of everyone, you never disappoint. But the other thing that they do that's kind of better is that they remove the entire like the history of Stella's parents, which is it's played like a mystery both in the novel and in the David Lean film, but it's so unneeded. I can appreciate it in a way, more or less. It's just,
yeah,
it's karma. It's you do something good and it's going to pay off in the future. And so the fact that young Pip helps out a convict, and later on the convict becomes rich, manages to escape prison again, he just becomes rich and supports him and turns him into a proper gentleman. And the convict, guess what, he was also Stella's father. It's like, why? Why do we need
it's
this?
it's the signs of a terrified director and the terrified novelist coming together and thinking, "By God, we've got to link these characters together again somehow. How do we get them back?" It's like, yeah, happenstance conclusions, that'll do. And it's
Gets the
just,
blessing.
it's such a filthy cop out. It's just
Yeah.
weak and it's just grim. And it's to be fair though, I think it's what the David Lean version does so well is that it actually accepts the fact that you can't change those fractures of the story. It is very accepting of the fact that it has work to do and it has its
Mm.
work cut out for it. But again, even for the David Lean adaptation, the best moments are his craftsmanship, his technical aspects, the sound, because it's very dialogue heavy, that film, and the dialogue is not particularly inspired.
No, they do have good performers. And I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
a fun trivia, it's that this is the earliest Alec Guinness film.
Oh,
He plays Herbert Pocket. That was, when he popped up on screen, I was just happy. I was like, Alec Guinness. He's like Chris Cooper. He never disappoints. He's
yeah,
always fun. He's always fun. And he does manage, like, honestly, Herbert Pocket in the novel, I remember nothing, to the point that I was watching the movie. I was like, is this a new character? Like, oh no, it's not. And they remove him entirely from the 1998 version, which doesn't help making this more confusing. But at least he makes it stand out. It makes him a fascinating, a fun, enjoyable presence to be around. And like you
yeah,
mentioned, like David Lean adds a lot of manages to make this more exciting and more emotional, because the whole escape on the boat towards the end is exciting.
yeah.
When Miss Havisham, it just catches on fire in the house, is exciting. Like, all of those moments work, and even the ending in its own way just kind of works. Um, but that's what doesn't work in the 1998 version. It's just
It's
everything is downplayed. It doesn't feel earnest,
yeah,
because I'm watching the previous film and going, you know what? It's completely unneeded. The whole like relationship, Estella and their father and whatnot, just all of that is unneeded. But I'm watching it and I'm feeling some sort of emotion, like the camera work, the performances, the music, which is honestly a very good soundtrack for 1946 standards.
Yeah.
But then I'm watching it, like you mentioned it earlier, just Robert De Niro dying in this dirty subway after getting stabbed in the belly. I was just like,
It's
oh no.
there are a lot of change, and I suppose it's because it's loosely based on the novel. But when you use the term loosely, that does not give you a remit to change everything.
Hmm.
There are so many changes made in here, like the actual growth and progression of Pip. As he's no longer groomed to be a gentleman, he's thrown into the world of art, and it's such an odd change because it means nothing.
It feels like something that was made because people are going to get it more. Like the
Yeah,
gentleman doesn't exist really nowadays, so make him an artist,
but that's the
troubled
thing. It's like
artist.
why is not having a gentleman available? Why is the immediate switch going to be? Oh, he's an artist now. I don't get what they're trying to do with that, and it's never really established that well. Other than he draws occasionally, and to be fair, the drawings in that montage that he does of Gwyneth Paltrow, they're shit. I imagine it's to cash in on the whole Titanic drawing thing. That was what
Oh
their aim
yes,
was.
oh
But
yes.
it doesn't help that Ethan Hawke does not have great handiwork. Um, I don't know if that's him drawing. I hope not, for his sake. I just think it's lacking a lot, and what it does have is like Hank Azaria, which is you know it's. I remember when he was meant to
A
be the
thing.
next big thing. Like he was in Dodgeball, he was in Night at the Museum, he was in fucking what you call it. He was in Heat. Like he was
It
going to be
was.
something. He was in Run Fat Boy Run and Celebrity. Like he has good films under his belt, and I've never understood why.
I don't know.
Because don't
It
get me
is a
wrong,
mystery.
he's a nice guy, I'm sure, but
He's personally nice, probably.
yeah,
But
I don't doubt it. But what I can say is that nothing in the '90s version is particularly good. Um,
yeah,
it's
even Emmanuel Lubezki's cinematography, which I was reading by some people, is one of the best aspects of the movie. It is very lackluster.
yeah, it's not exactly Birdman or Children of Men. So
Oh,
it
oh
kind of
God.
it's not Cat in the Hat either, obviously, which is his big three.
I mean, I
Um,
wish.
I mean, Cat in the Hat's fantastic though. It's better than Great Expectations, all three of them. Um, I think for you're laughing, I'm not.
That's gonna be an episode in the future, then.
It's
Just-
incredible. But I think as a movie that wants to be something it's not, which is an adaptation of Great Expectations. It is not good. So if you remove the Great Expectations, all right, we can forget that it's that. This is just a romantic drama. It's still bad, and it's still bad for the same reasons. It's very convoluted. There is very little chemistry between this cast because for all the actual interactions Ethan Hawke and Gwyneth Paltrow have, you're gonna have Cuaron doing like a slow motion upskirt shot, which is just like why? What was the thought process behind this? It's like he doesn't trust his performers to actually exude emotion, so he must actually like infiltrate their clothing so we know what's
yeah,
happening.
that's the weirdest thing because it's. I mean, we mentioned Titanic. Titanic is still it's a PG-13 movie
Yeah.
that's not trying to be erotic, but it's very seductive because of the chemistry between the actors. Meanwhile, this is a rated R, which is it
What?
has no business being rated R, and
It's
they
for
don't
the
even push it. It's just weird.
it's for De Niro being stabbed. Obviously, that's the R rating.
Yeah, I think I checked the R rating because of De Niro, but it was in the opening when he just pops out of the water out of nowhere, which was also very odd.
Why?
Like he's just staring into the water, and Robert De Niro jumps out at
Well,
him,
that's the
and he
thing.
just says
It's
"fuck" 5 times in a row.
scenes like that. I understand the reasoning behind it, where it's like, all right, we need to separate ourselves from the novel, but also retain the sort of Pip interacting with the prisoner.
Yeah, all the
That
beats.
sets up the third act. It is necessary. What is not necessary is having Robert De Niro hold his breath, popping up out of nowhere as a kid just draws a shark in water, which is like, I may sound like I'm just sort of deflating fun out of everything, but I wouldn't take paper in the water. I don't do that. I don't agree with it. But why? One, how long has he held his breath for? And two, why is he just popping out of the like? Surely other people have been in that water, and he's just lied low. So, and even then, it's like when the police boat comes by and they can clearly see someone getting off the boat and swimming to the boy over next to him. It's like,
Just
oh,
looking at them from a distance.
have you seen anyone in an orange jumpsuit?
In the
No,
middle of
no.
the sea.
It's like, oh, that boy wasn't swaying earlier. Why is it swaying now? I don't know. Maybe there's a man in an orange jumpsuit latched to it. It's
Yeah.
but it's all those choices that is kind of like they don't make practical sense. They don't make
No.
a sense that would benefit anyone.
And even like character wise, it's like the novel isn't particularly subtle, but they managed to make the script even more obvious than what Dickens wrote.
Yeah,
It's just it's ridiculous. Even the whole character of Uncle Joe. Uncle Joe was the only proper good character throughout the entire story. You have Chris Cooper, who does a fantastic job in this one, the most consistent performance at least. And, and they just have him be an absolute clown when he arrives at the party, at like the opening of the gallery of Finn. And he just arrives like, "Oh, I come from the country. I don't know how to act in such a setting. I'm just gonna wave my arms around, hoping to hit someone." And it's too much. It's too much. The novel and the other film, like the way they're portraying him, you do feel the difference in the social class, like the divide, and how Pip
yeah.
has kind of abandoned his roots, just being more humble, even though poorer. But in the film, it's just kind of like, now make him act like an idiot. Like everyone is going to understand he does not belong to that environment. It's like,
It's
sure.
yeah, it's the disparity and the obvious desire to create conflict out of nowhere. It's like, let's throw a character that isn't really needed here into
Mm.
this, so we have something to launch off of for the rest of the characters. And what is worrying about the new Great Expectations is that, you know, it's Alfonso Cuaron. This is his project. David Mamet wrote the narration for it, which is just
For free.
for free on the
No one
condition
should
that
have known.
nobody ever found out. And
Bless whoever leaked that. It's just, I think it was ashamed.
yeah,
That's me like,
it's
you know what, I'll do my best to save this project, but just I don't want anything to do with it. People mustn't know it was me.
you can't save a project like this though. This is like it's one of those big projects where it's all the right elements. The cast
Mm.
is there, the director is there, the story is there. Because despite Great Expectations, the book not being a particularly fond one for us, we still
Mm-hmm.
had it fun with the David Lean one.
Yes.
That's my
Yes.
strange issue. Is that okay? Fair enough. I wasn't exactly keen on the book. Thought it was all right. The film was very good, and then this one's just it's meant to be like a best of both, but it turns out being neither. It's just nothing, and it's empty. It's a really shallow piece.
Yes. Yes. It's incredibly underwhelming, even in the final moments, which again, David Lean, he manages to elevate the final moments of like the fact that Estella goes back to the mansion and she's starting to transform into her protector, let's say Miss
Yeah,
Havisham, which is kind of like, I got married, but marriage sucks. Like everything went bad. I'm just gonna sit here in this comfy chair. This was my childhood. This is where I was happy. I'm just gonna stay here. And Pippi's like, no, and just destroy, like pulls down the curtains, brings light into this house. Like I'm watching it. I'm like, you know what? That's cinema. It's
yes,
bringing
that's
emotions out of me. Yeah, I'm feeling the struggle of the characters. I honestly hate Estella in every form, written word and on the screen. Horrible character. And I was kind of like, yes, like he's doing what needs to be done. It's powerful. And then the other one is just kind of like, but we're just looking at the water and just holding hands, roll credits. It's like, fuck me. They finished the budget for anything more interesting. Just, I don't know.
it's a horribly underwhelming film, and I don't think the book's horrible. I do think the book is underwhelming though. There's nothing within that would either spur me on to read more Dickens or actually go on to invest my time in the rest of his work. It's not badly written. I just it's not my cup of tea. But even then, it's like you'd expect a better, a better experience. Really, that's what I was hoping for.
Yeah, that's kind of Dickens in a nutshell, at least for me.
Yeah,
Um, but yeah, great expectations. It is what it is. But
I mean,
let's
this
move on.
this was his penultimate novel, wasn't it?
I think it was, yes.
Good.
And even just look at. Actually, what was the last novel he wrote? I'm curious
Um.
now.
Yeah. No. Well, I wish I'd brought it up. Now we're going to search it.
Mr. Wiki,
Really? Oh.
up
Oh, I
yours,
thought that was the
sire.
title of a fucking book.
Okay, he
Uh.
wrote Great Then he had Our Mutual Friend, which was a monthly serial. Then he wrote The Signal Man, which is I've never heard of. Okay, it's a short story.
The
And then he
Mystery
wrote,
of Edwin Drood. I mean,
well,
sorry, but Great Expectations by the BBC in 2003 was ranked 17th for the greatest novels of all time.
I think
And
it laid the groundwork. That's why.
yeah, exactly.
Just purely, purely for the legacy of it all. Which is, I mean, fair enough. Cannot love everything. That's what I always
No,
say.
no, but at least it's now finished, and we would never as soon as this segment ends, we never have to mention the words "Great Expectations" ever again.
Well, we will at the end of the episode.
All right, but apart from that, other than that, we never have to do it again.
I'm not gonna think about Estella or Pip or Finn like ever again. Just no more Anne Bancroft in weird wigs, thankfully. Uh, but speaking of weird wigs, let's talk about Red Dragon by Thomas Harris.
You want to know how he's choosing them, don't you?
I thought you might have some ideas.
Why should I tell you?
You get to see the file in this case. And there's another reason.
Pray tell.
Thought you might be curious to see if you're smarter than the person I'm looking for.
Then by implication, you think you're smarter than me since you caught me.
No. I know that I'm not smarter than you.
Then how did you catch me?
You had disadvantages.
What disadvantages?
You're insane.
You're very tan, Will. Your hands are rough. They don't look like cops' hands anymore. And that shaving lotion is something a child would select. It has a ship on the bottle, doesn't it? Don't think you can persuade me with appeals to my intellectual vanity.
I don't think I'll persuade you at all. You'll either do it or you won't. Besides, we have Dr. Bloom working on it, and he's the best.
Do you have the file with you?
Yes?
Pictures?
Yes?
Let me have them and I might consider it.
No.
Dream much, Will?
Goodbye, Dr. Lecter.
You haven't threatened to take away my books yet. Let me have the file and I'll tell you what I think.
Red Dragon came out in 1981. Thomas Harris is a fascinating character because we talked about Black Sunday in an Uncut Gems episode many months ago. And if you haven't listened to it, dear listener, just seek it out because it was a very fun film to talk about. And I was looking at Thomas Harris' career, and he's only written like 6-7 novels, which is surprising. It takes 8 or 9 years to write something. He literally writes because he has to. If you're reading interviews with him or other writers talking about him, he's in pain when writing novels. He's like, he just has to get the work done. Poor guy. And he's written a novel like 2 years ago in 2019. It came out after like 12, 13 years since he wrote Hannibal Rising. But speaking of Hannibal, he wrote Black Sunday. It was a success. It was adapted into a John Frankenheimer film. And after that, he wrote Red Dragon. Red Dragon, which is the first novel to feature Hannibal Lecter, aka Hannibal the Cannibal. And this is the novel about Agent Will Graham trying to bring down the Tooth Fairy or the werewolf killer. And in order to, he's a very empathetic detective slash FBI profiler slash investigator. Though his job is as an FBI profiler. And what's interesting about him as a character is that he's very empathetic. Like he needs to get into the mindset of the killer to actually catch them. And this leads him down to a dark road, and he asks the help of Dr. Hannibal Lecter, a brilliant psychologist who's also a cannibal. And he also, like, that's the main reason why he went up to an insane asylum and a lot of other things. But this is where the character comes from. And ever since then, like, people loved Hannibal Lecter so much that Harris ended up writing the freaking Silence of the Lambs that was adapted into a movie. Anthony Hopkins starred in it, and the rest is history. Whether it's good history or bad history, we'll talk about that because the legacy of these novels is fascinating. But before actually going to Anthony Hopkins, there was a previous adaptation, which is Manhunter by Michael Mann. I watched it. I don't know about you, Ewan, but like I read Red Dragon for the first time for the podcast, and I quite enjoyed the novel. I think it has a few flaws, quite a few flaws here and there.
Yeah, I
Not to say
it's
questionable elements, but the film itself, Manhunter, I watched it like a few years ago, like 3 years ago, I believe. I wasn't a fan of it. Then I revisited it earlier this year in my Michael Mann binge. I really liked it. And
yeah,
watching it
good.
after watching the 2002 movie, which we'll get to, but after watching that, I was like, fuck, this is a masterpiece. This is a perfect film compared to both the novel and the new movie.
So I I prefer Manhunter and Brian Cox as Hannibal Lecter to Anthony Hopkins and The Silence of the Lambs. I think
Preach.
it's beyond the pale. It is absolute perfection, and I think it's as well. I mean, in hindsight, I think it's because I'm halfway through watching Succession with Brian Cox.
Ah,
That man is on just another plane of ability, and it shows in Manhunter as well. And I think it's I wasn't particularly again like I was as keen on Great Expectations as I was on Red Dragon. I thought it was all right. I think my big issue with the writing of Red Dragon is you can kind of tell Thomas Harris doesn't like writing. He but bless his heart, I don't either. But here we are
same,
now.
yeah.
Um, it feels quite procedural. He's not willing to sort of experiment or expand. He's very much the system he has works. Why would I change from that? And that's a very sound thought process to have. And I can't blame him for that. I'll be honest with you. But what it did expand on eventually was films that were just incredible. Silence of the Lambs is a fantastic film. You know, it's a modern classic essentially, isn't
Yep.
it? 91. It was the big board sweeper. It won Best Actor, Best Actress, Best Picture, Best Director, and Best Screenplay. It's like the big
Hmm.
five. So what is a shame though is that it didn't happen for Manhunter from Michael Mann because that is far more deserving of it. Because I mean, you've got William Peterson and Brian Cox in the same film as one another, and you've got Joan Allen as well, and it's
Tom
just such
Noonan,
a Tom Noonan's in it.
Dennis Farina, my boy.
Dennis Farina as Jack Crawford. Inspired casting.
And it's a small side note. I love Dennis Farina so much. There's someone else in like the museums that I'm working at whose first name is Dennis, and we always say people's name like the full names, and I'm always on the verge of saying Dennis Farina every time I'm talking about him. The name is always in my head. It's just one and the same. But yeah, I completely agree with what you're saying. Um, Speaking of the novel for a second, you touched upon this. It is very procedural, and I agree. It is procedural to a fault, which is something that's very different with
Yeah,
Manhunter, the movie, because Michael Mann movies are basically, men who are very fucking good at their jobs, just doing it very well, and it's gonna show
yeah,
you doing them very well, and that's the procedural element, but it works the way he constructs it. Harris isn't it's not bad in any way, but it's like you feel the length when it's just calling someone up, asking for information, they're doing the search and blah blah blah. Oh, a Hannibal is a letter in his room, and just the entire process of getting to read the note and Hannibal not realizing what's happened. It is thrilling in a way, but it's not particularly exciting after a while. Like after 10 pages,
yeah,
it's like the thing is still going on. It's like, yeah, sure, just get on with it. Where the book shines for me, which is something that also works in in Manhunter, and to a lesser extent, even in the 2002 version. But in the novel, I really, really like Francis Dollarhide, aka the Tooth Fairy. Thomas Harris has written those crime novels, but they started out like Red Dragon, then Silence of the Lambs. They started out as crime novels, but you can see that he really, really likes writing the killers. And
Yeah,
I have read Silence of the Lambs. I read it before watching the movie, actually, by like years. I think I read it in like the first year of high school, and I watched the movie in 2018, 2019. It took a while to get around to it. but I was the way he writes Buffalo Bill in that one as well. And then he wrote Hannibal, which I haven't read, but having seen the movie, like it's all about Hannibal Lecter. He's great at writing those characters, like the tormented psyche, the psychosexual problems that they're having, the twisted thoughts in their minds, the tragic backstory. Like all of those elements work to a point where I was like reading the book, and there's 3 or 4 chapters that are just about the backstory of Dollarhide. And I was like, well, this is great. Give me more of that. Oh no, we're going back to Graham. He's on the phone. Ah, okay, fine, we need this. Just-
I suppose it's you've got to have breaks though, haven't you? You know,
yeah.
you've got to have the moments in there that not detract exactly, but break up the exciting bits. You've got to have the downtime to appreciate the highs. My issue with it was that there was no real consistency to when those would
Mhm.
happen. It would be kind of you're jutting along. You know, there's a phone call. All of a sudden, it leaps up. Brilliant. That's what you like to see. If it leaps up suddenly, sometimes like that, the thrill of the climax, where you get from just a sudden phone call exploding into something fascinating, and that works. It's just I think it's more the other way, where you've got an exciting bit, and then there's so many chapters in that book, and they're not particularly long.
Mm.
So my offset to that would be, all right, great. So the short chapters, they're going to be punchy, they're going to be inspired, they're going to be really quick to get into the next chapter. And what you really get is just a lot of different perspectives with no concrete order.
Mhm.
You have no real sort of. You do obviously have a timeline, but you don't have that sort of impressionable perspective. You don't have the the pieces are all there. They're just in the wrong bloody order, and it's frustrating because for me, it's Red Dragon's very good with its character
Mhm.
building as opposed to Great Expectations. It's
Yes.
the characters in um, Red Dragon. You know, people remember the name Jack Crawford. People remember the name Hannibal Lecter, and it is because of that first book, and it's because of the adaptations that came after it. It's such a if you asked someone, oh, well, what can you name a few horror villains? It's Hannibal Lecter's going to be mentioned.
Definitely, yeah.
Now, in hindsight, that is now because of the film rather than the book. But without the books, we wouldn't have the film. So I suppose that's the offset. I just think Manhunter is far, far, far better than the book. And I think Red Dragon. Well, Red Dragon's a movie. That's I'm fine saying that. Um, it's it's an odd little gem. Uh,
Yeah. Before we jump into the movie, just Manhunter is not very faithful to the novel.
No, it couldn't give a
And
shit.
bless him. Michael Mann wrote the script. Bless him. Bless his soul, because he knew what needed to be changed. And it's so weird because in my head there's a lot more of Dollarhide than I actually remembered. Like even now, I'm thinking about the movie. I'm thinking about Tom Noonan's performance, which is so good, and it feels like he's in far more of the movie than he actually is. And one thing that's great about the film is that it's building up this mystery, like who's the Tooth Fairy, who's this killer, and it all escalates to what's one of the best scenes in the book and in the film, and I would even say in the later one, which we'll touch on in a bit. But the scene where Francis Dollarhide, the Tooth Fairy, kidnaps a sleazy tabloid writer, Mr. Fred. Wait, what's the name? Freddie Lowndes. Freddie Lowndes was played by Stephen Lang. I still don't recognize him in this film. Like he's so young. He's so young. Um, but that entire scene, like that's a creepy reveal because you don't know
Yeah,
who this Tooth Fairy is, and the fact that he comes on screen like completely naked or at least like shirtless, with the tattoo, with the bandana, with the sock on his head, like all of that. It's an effective visual piece of imagery,
Oh yeah,
and and then you start following Dollar Hyde, and Michael Mann doesn't make him as sympathetic as the novel, but it works because I don't know about you, I was expecting the book to end just like Manhunter because I that's what I remembered. There was like, oh no, like he has this poor blind girl in his house. They're kind of dating, and he's going to kill her maybe, and then I know Will Graham will come. But that's not what happens in the novel. What happens in the novel is that, and I really hate it because Thomas Harris creates a compelling character, a very someone you empathize with, not necessarily sympathize with, but empathize with. Dollar Hyde and his past.
yeah,
And we talked about Great Expectation, like love conquers all. It is kind of leading towards that. It leads to that. He's so obsessed with this painting by William, with drawing actually, by by William Blake, the Great Red Dragon and the Woman in the Sun, something like that. He's so obsessed with it, he actually ends up eating the painting to kind of destroy this dark voice in his head. But he's unable to do that. But in the final moment, he's like, you know what? I actually love this woman very much. She showed me something. She showed me light. She made me get removed from this dark presence. Like it's very powerful. And Harris makes you believe that he kills himself and lets the woman free. And that was like, Jesus, I love this. It's poignant, it's powerful. You don't need the big climax where the villain is kind of attacking. It's attacking Will Graham. There's some bullshit. It's like, oh, thank God. This is lovely. He's back with the family. Everything's all right. Ah, no. Dollar Hyde faked all of that, and he is at Will Graham's house, and they start attacking each other, and then the wife shoots him. And I was like, oh, Harris, why did you do that? He had such a good ending. It works so well, even
yeah,
thematically. But no, we needed the cliched, like, wow, but he's the killer, he needs the comeuppance, the hero needs to save the day.
yeah.
I don't-
It's the sad inevitability of some horror genres. Some pieces in that genre
yeah.
very much are. We have to have a happy ending to offset all the terror that came before it, and I understand Harris's decision there, where it is hard to offset all of the bad stuff and the villainy in that
Yeah.
film with an ending that powerful and that poignant, and it is a shame because I mean Red Dragon adapts it, and you can see it there where it's just
Jesus.
you know it is a film with problems, that one, but I'd have to agree with you because within Red Dragon there are just moments of genuine genius.
Mm.
There are, for all I didn't thoroughly love it, that there are parts of that book that are just phenomenal. The big reveals, the way he can manipulate twists and turns, not just to fit the narrative, but to throw an audience and a reader off. It's second nature to him.
Mm.
It's phenomenally well crafted, and it's annoying how easy he gets with it because as he understands how easy that is to do, he starts to get a bit complacent. He starts to repeat on himself and go over the usual cases. And with Manhunter, where you have there is that Michael Mann has no time for that sort of thing.
Yes.
He has no sympathy for those who are not fully along for the ride. But I think from a technical perspective, the direction of that film is phenomenal. Like, even if you took Brian Cox out of the picture,
Yeah.
that white cell and the white iconography of everything, it looks perfect. It's absolutely incredible.
Yeah. Courtesy of Dante Spinotti, the
Oh,
cinematographer, who's a banger film cinematographer. I mean, he's made classics like X-Men: The Last Stand or Ant-Man and the Wasp. But he has also some other films like Last of the Mohicans. He has Heat, Manhunter, of course. Like
Tower Heist with Ben Stiller and Eddie Murphy.
I don't know what happened where he ended up making the rest of Brett Ratner's career. Well, like he's just shot the entire. I don't know what happened there, but still, like his work in Manhunter, beautiful. Like you say,
Yeah,
Manhunter, I'm already thinking about the first image of Will Graham and Jack Crawford sitting on this log, perfectly framed with the sea in the backdrop. Just the color palette,
yeah,
how it's like Will Graham and his wife are always shot with these blue lights. Meanwhile, you have
yeah,
Dollar Hyde who's always in these green hues. it's so good. The coldness and whiteness of the asylum and Hannibal Lecter's, which also, I mean, we didn't say that this, but is named Lector for some
Oh yeah,
reason.
they changed the name ever so slightly.
Is there a reason?
Um,
Not really. I don't think it was ever explained. I think some problems were
I don't
like in
think it's ever.
translation, maybe. Like he just wrote it badly and never fixed it. That's what it feels like. Even Dollarhide is with two L's, but is it with one L in the book? Like those small changes that I think are more accidental than intentional.
I don't get why they changed the name.
I don't know.
Um, I mean, it's one of those choices that throws you off because there is a story behind it, I assume, but it's not an important one that changes the sort of angle of the
Yeah.
film. You know, Michael Mann employs the very same concepts as the Silence of the Lambs did, which is keep Hannibal Lecter away from the screen as much as possible because it's his absence that affects the story rather than his inclusion. And it is those scenes that you get with Brian Cox where he's got the telephone that breaks, and it's little things like that they have much more impact when you don't get to see much of him because we don't get a good grip on who he is as a character. We already know that he's evil. His conquest for cannibalism is established quite early on. What we don't get is actual time with him to actually apply that to him. And what that happens is, it happens in The Silence of the Lambs as well, is you've got a character that is just missed, and it's fantastic. It's so sly and really like just deceitful,
Yeah.
and you're always expecting more, and you kind of are getting more because the actions that all these characters are taking are directly because of him. You don't need presence if the actions are being replacing it.
Yeah. He's a master chess player. Just moving
Yeah.
just moving the pieces in the right order so everything unfolds. And what I love about,
Speaking of,
well, I wanted to say the ending of Manhunter because I didn't actually say that,
oh,
but I love the ending of Manhunter, and I also really really don't like it because it has probably the best use of Inagada de Vida that's ever going to be
oh,
put in
yeah,
film, but it's
it's
so
phenomenal.
shoddily edited. It's so weird the way the entire sequence, the way it unfolds, where Will Graham comes to the house of Dollarhide, saves Reba, the blind girl, and he kills Dollarhide. But it's like the
Yeah,
music is booming, all of that is great, but it's just like the editing in it is so weird. And that's always what takes me out of it because I want to love the entire sequence like so many others. But I'm kind of like, but there's some odd cuts, and I don't know if it's related to like the length of the shot. It would have been too long, not long enough for the entire song to play out, which is like 8 minutes long already. Jesus, but yeah, and it's great, and and then he goes back to his home, and he can embrace his wife, and that's it, and it works. And I also want to say another scene that's in the film, but I don't think it's in the novel is that it's the scene in the supermarket where Will Graham is talking to his stepson, because I don't think it's the actual son. I think it's the stepson. Maybe they changed that in the film. I don't remember. But he's just talking with him and explaining what happened in his past, like why he went to the asylum, why he had problems with Lecter, why he's doing what he's doing. And that's where you see like that's Michael Mann. Michael Mann loves also this family, like themes of family. They've always been in his stories, like Thief trying to go to this brighter future with the woman he loves, and Heat is the same thing. Like it's a constant, it's a recurring theme in his filmography, and it's those small moments where I go, you know what, the novel is very good, but it's missing the humanity from Will Graham's side
yes,
a little
yeah.
bit.
It's. I think that's the big issue. It's inevitably something will get lost in translation. Just for Michael Mann, though, it turns out to be a rather important piece that's missing here because Manhunter is for me very near perfect, but it is lacking that sort of sensible aspect to it. It doesn't have that emotive underlining of Will Graham. Um, it's not as if he doesn't try. I just think what he does try isn't well thought through. He explains to his son why he retired and stuff like that, and it's like, all right, that's good, but without the actual practical cause of it being shown to us or really delved into, you can analyze his personal aspects and his merits and his personality all you like. It doesn't really tell us anything about Lecter or about the case that he's on, and it's quite hard to link the two. And that is one of the few compliments I'll give Red Dragon, is that it does kind of manage
Mhm.
that very haphazardly and very heavy-handedly manages it, but at least that link is made. I mean, it does mean Anthony Hopkins with a ponytail shooting Edward Norton,
Oh
but
boy.
at the very least, there is a sense of understanding that the personal effects of the main character are inevitably going to spill into the anti-hero
Mhm.
cannibal guy that's helping him, but not really. It's the confusion that Mann creates so well that Brett Ratner just doesn't understand in Red Dragon.
Yeah, and Michael Mann, I think especially like of all three versions of the story, novel, first adaptation, and second adaptation, Michael Mann is the one that gets the closest to creating a link between Dollarhide and Graham, which is something it is present in the novel and the other film, but it feels more believable in a way, especially because William Peterson is unhinged in this film. Like you do see him on the brink of madness, just losing it all, which is which is not present in Red Dragon and the
No, no.
2002 one. It's just let's get into it finally, fully, because I mentioned earlier, like Silence of the Lambs was written, was made into a film, big success, wins all the Oscars, like you mentioned. Um, and people wanted more. They were like, "We want more Hannibal Lecter." A character was meant to be not a throwaway character, but like he was just a secondary important character in Red Dragon and also a little bit less in Silence of the Lambs. And Thomas Harris was like, you know what? Fine, I'll do it. I'll write another one of those. So I think in 1999, 98, he wrote Hannibal, which is all about Lecter, who's escaped from the asylum in Silence of the Lambs. He's just living freely in Florence, and there's some nasty people who want to get him, and blah blah blah. Sure, fine, whatever. And that was made into a film by directed by Ridley Scott. They changed Jodie Foster with Julian Moore because Jodie Foster didn't like the changes they made to the script and also to some of the
Yeah.
changes in the book. Understandably so, because it's such a bonkers story. It's like a gothic vampire tale. It's very atmospheric. It's very sleazy. It's very gory. I kind of like that. I
Is that
like nasty
that's the
stuff.
one with Gary Oldman,
Yes,
isn't it?
Gary Oldman,
Yeah,
excellent makeup. I mean, I'm not the biggest
it's
fan.
terrifying.
Yeah, I'm not the biggest fan of just
It's
people in makeup, in heavy makeup, but that works. It's a very disturbing. I've seen people like that. Unfortunately, put people with scarred faces, and and it works in the film. Ray Liotta, fantastic, getting his brains eaten, but but of course, the film was so successful that what happened afterwards is that they were like, you know what? Everyone's loving Anthony Hopkins. Everyone wants more. We have another story. Thomas Harris is taking way too long to write anything else. We have another story that's just ready to be remade. We have Red Dragon. We have the prequel. We have the origin of Hannibal Lecter. And it's like, no, that's not the origin of Hannibal Lecter. That's a story with Lecter in it. But yeah, Universal, I believe, is the studio. They got very fucking greedy. And they were like, Anthony Hopkins has signed a contract. We can still use him. Let's make the prequel. Let's make Red Dragon. And they made it, hiring the best, best journeyman director of Hollywood, Brett Ratner. Um, and they also hired Dante Spinotti again, the same man who shot Manhunter, shot Red Dragon, and like it still doesn't feel real comparing the two.
yeah, no.
But
It's
Red Dragon, I was not a fan of. I had a wonderful double feature of Hannibal and Red Dragon. It was like, man, Hannibal looks like Citizen Kane compared to this. It looks like a real movie. I didn't like this film. I really didn't. Not to the extent of the Cuaron Great Expectations, but it's close. It's close.
yeah, it's not a good film, and I think that's for a variety of reasons. It's you've got the cinematographer there from Manhunter, and that feels like trying to rub off the talent of a different franchise,
Mhm.
essentially. Manhunter on its own as a standalone independent piece has nothing to do with the Anthony Hopkins stuff. Yet you bring Anthony Hopkins in for a third feature on Hannibal Lecter, you would expect him to feel comfortable in that role at some point. Nah, he doesn't really.
Doesn't care anymore.
He feels really out of it, and it's the quote he had for when he signed on to do Hannibal. He said that Hannibal the book was where is it? He thought it was bizarre, essentially, and
That's
that
one
it
way to put
needed
it.
some edits. Yeah, exactly. He said, I thought it was really overreaching and so bizarre, I couldn't make my mind up about signing on to do the film. Some of it I found intriguing, some I was a little doubtful about. So if he was doubtful about Hannibal, I don't know what he was thinking for Red Dragon, because Red Dragon is significantly just like if you compare the sort of 14 minutes of fame he had in Silence of the Lambs to what is now a starring role, it's not that he's not up to the task, because we know Anthony Hopkins is a very good actor. It's that he's not really given anything to do. He's still the same character as he was in Silence of the Lambs, but stretched out to almost 2 hours.
Yeah,
I think it's over two
and it's
hours.
not needed. And that's the shocking
No,
thing.
no, not at all.
Red Dragon is only 2 minutes longer than Manhunter. It feels like it's 30 minutes longer. It's
Yeah,
just
and it's because the pacing is
it's
dreadful.
all over the
Because this
place.
is not an adaptation of a Thomas Harris novel. This is something that has seen Seven and has thought we can do that, and we can throw Hannibal Lecter into it. And the offset of that is just dreadful. It feels like an early beta version of Saw when you've got Philip Seymour Hoffman glued to a chair.
Yeah, it's very nasty film. I will say it is more, and that's interesting because it's kind of at the core of the podcast as well. Because we haven't really found this much in the previous episodes. Because it's always like, you know what, this film is kind of very more faithful to the novel, and it still works very very well. I would say this is probably the first instance where the movie is very faithful to the novel, but it just doesn't really work while
Yeah,
having more just well simply because you're translating something directly on the page doesn't mean it's going to work. And that's how I feel about Red Dragon. It's just they are hitting many of the same notes. They are making it way too much about Hannibal Lecter where it's not needed. You have he has become a proper joke at that point. Like it's always
yeah,
making quips about I read it somewhere, some review I think on Letterboxd, where someone was like, they just stretched, they took the ending of Silence of the Lambs where he says, "I'm having an old friend for dinner," and they were like, "Oh, that's the character of Hannibal. He's always making cannibal jokes." It's like,
yeah.
that's not it. Like we saw Brian Cox, he's not making cannibal jokes. He's
Yeah.
menacing by being very quiet, and that's what he was in Silence of the Lambs as well, Anthony Hopkins. But in this one, it's just poof, thrown out the window.
Well, that's the issue, isn't it? I understand if they want to sort of move the character on, they want to add more detail to
Hmm.
it, but to give the man a ponytail and stab him with an arrow is not the way to do that. It's
Ah,
such an odd
the
decision.
opening
And it's not as
scene,
if,
Jesus.
like, I mean, to be fair, the Dollarhide stuff, that takes precedence anyways. Ralph Fiennes is very much the core of Red Dragon. It's
Carries it.
not Anthony Hopkins, like, he's surplus to requirement, which is a shame because he should never be someone that is surplus to requirement because he's such a great draw. But he kind of just disappears for the third act of the film. He's just not there.
Well, yeah, because it doesn't. It has no reason to be there. I think that's honestly the primary problem. They were just wanted to capitalize on Anthony Hopkins as Hannibal, something that they
Yeah.
don't accomplish successfully. I really loathe, like properly loathe, the opening scene of the film where it's we're showing Hannibal in the past before he gets caught by Will Graham, and like William Peterson. I'm not the biggest fan of him as an actor. He can work in very specific contexts. He works great in Manhunter, and when squeaky voiced, blonde haired Edward Norton popped on screen, I was like, shit. This is not an upgrade. This is the opposite of an upgrade. It doesn't work. I would say that like looking at the cast, there's some great names. You mentioned Ralph Fiennes, Philip Seymour Hoffman. You have Emily Watson as Reba, as the blind lady. You have Mary Louise Parker as Graham's wife. You have my boy Harvey Keitel in the film. All great casting, honestly, on paper. The only one that doesn't work, it's Edward Norton. I don't know
Yeah,
why
and
they chose him.
it's a shame because like Edward Norton in this period was hot as shit.
True,
He
yeah.
was like the man to cast in anything. You know, he was essentially coming off the back of Fight Club being accepted.
Mhm.
It was like his breakthrough stuff was just petering out, and it's of course people are going to cast him. You know, and it's a shame that he doesn't fit here.
Mhm.
He fits more in Death to Smoochie than he does in Red Dragon. And I suppose that again, it's that sort of too many cooks thing.
Mhm.
This is a big cast, and it's yes, they're all in the right place, but the star power of them overtakes what they're actually doing. The reason Anthony Hopkins is in this film is not just to sell the movie on his name because he's Hannibal Lecter, but because he'll give them an extra boost despite not being in the film for all that long.
Yeah.
Again, and even then, it's the utilization of a character that doesn't show up for long. It's how you use the time you've got with them. You know, it's like Stellan Skarsgård in Dune. You know, he's not there for that long, but you're making the most of his time. Anthony Hopkins, his time is useless in this. It does not feel at all like it's making an impact.
Yeah.
I think you get the iconic scene where he's in the straitjacket and everything again. You get little bits and pieces here or there, but the dialogue around it, the creativity around it, it's not there. It's uninspired, and it's just not. It's not that it's not correct for the adaptation. Like you said, it's a fairly competent adaptation because it is faithful. But that's the issue. It's while Cuaron with Great Expectations went too far left with it, saying it's just loosely. And Red Dragon has the issue of being too closely connected. It wants to try and grasp at the pacing and the style and the technical aspects of the book so much that it relegates the actual draw of its box office runnings.
Exactly.
You know, you're relegating Anthony Hopkins to a role that is essentially just a bit part. You're over relying on bloody Edward Norton because, you know, I mean, Ralph Fiennes is brilliant and Philip Seymour Hoffman, he's always good. But they don't have the impact they should have because they're not given time to explore their roles.
They have more screen time. Dollarhide as a character has more screen time in Red Dragon compared to Manhunter, and it doesn't feel like that at all.
No, not at all.
And
It's a testament to how well you should use your time because I'm pretty sure Red Dragon is like a couple minutes longer.
Literally
than
2
Manhunter.
minutes.
Literally 2 minutes longer. And the difference is night and day. This is the same text adapted, but one has taken the liberty of artistic creativity, and the other has thought, we are going to be rigid, we are going to be safe, get Danny Elfman in the recording studio to do the soundtrack.
Just the soundtrack that's
So
this very stereotypical horror strings. They're like, just throughout the entire film. It's like, we don't need
But
that.
that's the thing. That's what happens when you get the guy that did the Batman films for Tim Burton. Like, what do you expect?
I think it's also a problem with just having a rushed production because in the span of 1 year, they went from Hannibal to Red Dragon coming out on the big screen, and you feel that.
Yeah.
It lacks polish, and honestly, it kind of lacks art. Which is not like it's not.
Yeah.
It's a proper just fluff blockbuster entertainment, and you watch Manhunter, and Manhunter is art. It's proper art. Even all of the scenes, like I think the most emblematic scene for me. I don't want to get ahead from the final segment, but one of my favorite scenes in the film and in the book as well, in a way, it's when Dollarhide brings Reba to a zoo to let her pet a tiger.
Yeah.
In the novel, it's
It's-
all from her perspective, and it's great.
Yeah.
In Manhunter, it has this like song that has like winds instruments just floating around. It creates a very exotic vibe to the whole scene, and it's taking its time. It's the close-ups of the hand down the fur. It's just it's so good. And then in Red Dragon, she's just kind of like some random stock music and plays Danny Elfman playing in the background, and she's just moving the hand around. Emily Watson is doing the best she can. But it lacks emotions. It lacks power. It lacks poetry. It is very poetic in the book and the other film. In this one, there's nothing to it.
But that's the thing. I think the reason there's nothing to it is because it's riffing on things that have already passed it by. There are times within Red Dragon where you think, all right, stuffy detective rooms. You've got Bill Camp as a police sergeant. it's far too reminiscent of David Fincher's
Hmm.
Seven, whereas you've got the stuffy boardroom, you've got an established iconic name as a police sergeant like Ali Ermey in Seven, and it's not that it's similar, it's just that it relies on those same tones where it's like Red Dragon isn't really a thriller. It's a very police detective mystery
Yeah.
drama with elements of strong horror, and I wouldn't throw it as a thriller because any police detective drama can be a thriller. Episodes of CSI could technically be classed as thriller. It's what you do with the characters and it's what you do with the emotions. But like you said, there's no art on display in Red Dragon. There's no emotion either, and I do think it's because Brett Ratner's just not a very good director. I've not seen anything by him that I'm like, wow, I can't wait to watch that again. I mean, Apt Pupil was fine. He did
Oh, that's not
well.
even
I
him
mean,
actually.
technically,
Apt Pupil, it's Brian Singer.
so
You're mixing
I know why
your
I'm
X
getting them
Men.
mixed up. I know why I'm getting them mixed up. I'm not saying why. It can be inferred
Well, yes.
from recent events. But no, he did. Yeah, he did Rush Hour. Why? Why would people have faith in the guy that did Rush Hour?
He made movie 43. Just for that, he should be in jail.
I've heard good things about that classic.
I was actually excited for it.
You were excited for movie
That was a
43.
dark time in my life, where I could be like, oh man, movie 43, let's go watch that in the cinema. Ah, man, bless me. And recently we did a podcast on as a Patreon exclusive podcast. So, dear listener, if you haven't already, subscribe to the Clappers Patreon. We talked for 2 hours with the good Jakub Flash of Uncut Gems. We talked about Stephen King. And one of
Oh
the
yeah,
things one of the conclusions we reached was it's good when something works on paper, but a good director and writer knows that some things are not going to work in a visual form. We talked about that with like Doctor
yeah,
Sleep and such. And I'm watching Red Dragon, and I'm like, you know what? Seeing Dollar Hyde eat the the painting of the Great Red Dragon does not really translate well into a visual
it
form.
doesn't.
Just Ralph Fiennes shoving pieces of paper in his mouth.
And it's knowing when to pick your visuals that is so important, and it's just not something Ratner has the sort of style for. He doesn't have a style.
It doesn't. It does. It's very derivative, and it's trying so much
Yeah,
to hammer in that this is going to lead into Silence of the Lambs. Like this was giving me Rogue One vibes, where it's just kind of like, oh, this is right before Episode 4. It's just all the little teases and the nods and the visual callbacks. You don't need them. This movie has the freaking like POV Jonathan Demme shots that make no sense because Jonathan Demme used them to make the viewer uncomfortable and putting them in the shoes of Clarice Sterling, which is great. That's directing. Brett
yeah,
Ratner is like, Dante, just use the shots they made in the other film because they're good. Just sprinkle references here. Like I groaned so hard when the movie ended because it's like,
yeah,
oh, we have an FBI agent who wants to talk to you, Hannibal, but I don't think you're interested. It's like, what's her name? It's like cut to black. It's like, oh fuck, just
yeah.
leading into the
It's
movie. Don't you get
and
it?
I think that's the issue with Red Dragon is it sees itself as a prequel when, to be honest, it
It's not.
doesn't feel like
That's
one.
the thing. It's not.
No,
It's a
God
first
no.
book. It's not a prequel. It came before everything else. But they're retroactively making it a prequel
Yeah.
just for Anthony Hopkins. And
And I mean, to be fair, that was like one of the few reasons he signed on is because
yeah,
Ted Talley, who wrote Silence of the Lambs, the screenplay, said, "All right, I will come back and do this." And more fool him, I suppose, because
yes,
I mean, when you look at big horror franchises like Nightmare on Elm Street, Jason Voorhees, Friday the 13th stuff, we could very much have had a series of films that was just going on and on and on. Hannibal Lecter could have been one of those. So I guess we've got to take some, you know, we can quell our troubles with the fact that that didn't happen.
Like
And
kind of, in a way, it kind of did as
in a way,
well.
it did. Hannibal Rising was released, wasn't it?
They
Soon after.
literally forced Thomas Harris to write a Hannibal prequel story to his younger years. Just like, oh man,
But
I haven't
why?
seen the
What
film.
is
Have you
this
seen it?
like? No, no.
I've read
I've seen a
things.
bit of the TV show with Mads Mikkelsen, but other
I've
than
seen the
that,
pilot. It was
it's
it
pretty
was
good.
good, but
It's yeah.
never. I did never went back. Maybe I should. I don't know.
It's just such a confusing film. It doesn't really know what it wants to be because on one hand you've got Brett Ratner directing an ensemble, which is never good, and on the other hand you've got a man that was quite literally forced to write a book so that they had something to make, and that is not a good mix because nobody wants to be there.
Truly, yeah. You feel the energy. There's very few actors who are committed in it, and I think easily like Ralph Fiennes, Emily Watson, and Philip Seymour Hoffman are the only ones who stand out in any positive way throughout the entire film. Those are the best sequences. Again, comparing it to Great Expectations from the 90s, this is also much more erotic than the previous film. Like they're pushing the
Yeah,
sexual angle of Dollarhide so much more. But this is where, like, the entire backstory that was intriguing in the novel, where he was uh, psychologically abused by his grandmother, all those problems in his childhood. Well, I mean, she did threaten him to cut his dick off when he was like 8 years old or 9 years old, which is rough. There's trauma right there. That's what can lead to growing up not in a healthy way. But all of that, I was like, you know what? That's interesting, even though it is kind of a cliche by now. But not that many
yeah,
crime authors were doing what Thomas Harris was doing in 1981. So that type of backstory is more common now. But
yeah,
the
precisely.
way it's used in the movie adaptation Red Dragon, it's literally just, oh, you hear some of her voice when we're introduced to Dollarhide, like to the grandma's voice, and then you have Graham reading some notes about his childhood. And when Dollarhide arrives at his home at the end, in that horrible, horrible ending, you have him repeating the homophobic, horrible, abusive things that the grandmother said. Like he's screaming those things to his own child that's being held at like knife point by Dollarhide as a way to get Dollarhide to be triggered by the past and drop the knife or leave the kid. And so you just have Edward Norton screaming horrible things at his child and Dollarhide. He was just thinking, what is going on here? This is not in the novel. Why did you think this was a good idea? Like, the ending of the book is already weak. They managed to make it even worse. That's an achievement.
I think that the best sort of conceptualization of that is just a note from the IMDb page, which is Norton and Ratner disagreed on the scene in which Graham approached the incarcerated Lecter for the first time. Ratner wanted Norton to incorporate a gesture or look to indicate Graham's fear, but Norton felt the audience would not need this if it were filmed correctly. And
You mean like
I
in
think that's
Manhunter?
precisely, yes. I think the biggest issue of Red Dragon is it's not filmed correctly. It is just not performed. You know what? The performances are fine. Edward Norton's out of his depth, but it's the sad inevitability of being the biggest star of the late '90s, alongside the people of Brad Pitt and that sort of thing. It's it's a tough line to toe,
Mm.
but I think when you've got people like Anthony Hopkins and Ralph Fiennes around you, it's rather difficult to perform poorly. I don't think enough credit is given to Ralph Fiennes in this. He is fantastic, but it doesn't matter. It's still a bad film. It's still unrewarding.
It's,
It's still it gets its inspiration from the wrong places.
yes, yes.
It's delving into a back catalogue of thrillers when Thomas Harris has handcrafted a piece of work just so they can adapt it. But
Yeah, it's not good. It's very, very much not good. I think we're in the consensus.
I think, yeah.
We agree that
Oh,
to
absolutely,
just
yeah.
Manhunter, it's cinema. Red Dragon, the film, is not. It's not cinema. It's very bottom of the barrel, and I would even say it's easily the weakest out of all of them, of like the Hannibal stories, including even Manhunter. Why not? But just it's easily the weakest one, because
Yeah,
it's the one that has the least effort into it, just
precisely.
creatively.
Yeah, it's the least satisfying of them all.
Yeah. I mean, it is what it is.
So
But
yeah, it's
why don't we end the show with the best scene and the best characters from the films and adaptations? And let's just continue with Red Dragon since we're talking about it. Why don't you go first, Ewan? With like the book, Manhunter, and Red Dragon the film.
oh okay. So I can just rely on Manhunter for all of this.
Hey.
Good. I'm really fond of that scene in Manhunter where I can't remember it quite clearly because my brain is not up to the task of remembering things these days. But it's when Brian Cox is in the cell and he's got the phone and he's fucking fiddling about with
Yep.
it and he's doing some, and you're never quite sure what he's doing until it clicks. And it's at the same time the characters realize, and at that point it's too late. And that's just happenstance genius from Michael
Hmm.
Mann to make an audience realize, as well as the characters, that it is too late for a certain person. That is inspired stuff, and I think a lot of that comes down to Brian Cox's performance, who is perfectly cast. It's a damn shame he wasn't asked to do it in Silence of the Lambs because
Oof.
that's his Oscar.
Yes.
But
Yes.
nonetheless, it's fantastic. I think as far as least favorite aspect of this, I mean, where to begin for Red Dragon? I like the scuffle that Edward Norton and Anthony Hopkins drag out, where Edward Norton is shot about 7 times, and his only infliction of defense is, ah, yes, I'll grab the bow and arrow quiver and stab him with it. And it's the sort of a lot of the bad things in that film can be gauged by Anthony Hopkins' reaction to having 3 arrows pierce his stomach, which is just a bit disappointed. And he's like, there is no reaction of scream or crying or anger. It's just, ho hum, another day as a cannibal. It's very accepting almost immediately of possible death.
It's a good sign of things to come, that sequence. What about characters? What's a character in the novel or in the films that stood out to you?
I've always liked Jack Crawford. I think Harvey Keitel plays him really well. I think, obviously, again, it's a bit stronger in Manhunter. But even in Red Dragon the book, he's like the guiding force. He's sort of like that reliable old hat character that you get in so many pieces these days. But it's such an integral role. It's such an important one. And he plays into it quite well. I mean, regardless of the adaptation, it works in all the movie adaptations. And Lawrence Fishburne and Hannibal is the big reliant aspect of it is that he's present. You're aware of him, but he doesn't steal the scene. He doesn't really have that defining spotlight moment. He never has a moment where it's like, my God, what a showstopper this Jack Crawford is. It's never like that, and it's rather telling that a performance can be so good despite not having that moment to it.
Yeah.
Dennis Farina obviously is just a powerhouse of a man, but he never has a moment that takes away from Brian Cox, or it never takes away from the stuff that they're doing with the actual antagonist of the piece, which is not Brian Cox, which is, what was his name?
Dollarhide.
I was going to say Dolomite for some reason. I think I'm just tired.
Understandable.
As far as least favorite character goes,
If there is any.
I think as far as the writing goes, I don't have a least favorite character. As far as the concepts of who the characters are, they're all very sound and they're very solid. But I would say maybe Hannibal Lecter in Red Dragon, I think is just weak. And it's a shame as well because I remember reading up on the interviews that Hopkins was doing around the time, and he was saying, I want to play this with more passion, with more variety, with more rage in it. And the offset of that is something completely devoid of what all audiences will know it from, which is a very calm and collected, sinister individual. And it's like it plays up to the fava beans and the old friend for dinner quips. He is playing a quip. That is all it is. And it's a sad shame because he's really, you can tell he's given it his best. But
It's not the best farewell to the character. No,
No, absolutely
no.
not.
Speaking for myself, like I would say in the book, I said it before. Like I really like Dollarhide. I like how we follow him around, how we get into his psyche, how complex he is. With a small, like a small point also to Jack Crawford, because when we were talking about him, he's actually a standout character. Could have been very much just kind of there because he's needed. But what I like especially is the relationship that he has with Graham and his wife, where like the wife hates him because he's the reason why he's always like her husband is always going back to work doing something very dangerous, and he understands that. Like Jack Crawford knows there's not much he can do. He says like, you know what, this is the only way we can actually catch the killer, and I didn't want to come back to get Graham, but I have to. It makes him very likable, and it helps, like you said, that you have Harvey Keitel in one version, you have Dennis Farina in the other, two of my favorite actors, so it was very easy in that sense to sympathize. Um, for the Manhunter, I really like Graham. Um, the first time around, I wasn't a fan of Peterson's performance, but now after having seen the movie 3 times, especially after reading the book, I think it's really good. I think he gets the character, he gets the rage, he gets the frustration, he gets the fact that he has this gift that's horrible, that's constantly haunting him. This obsession. I love those moments where he's just looking at the screen, watching those videotapes of the murdered families, where they're coming to life. It's very tragic in the book, but the way it's shot in the film, it has even more emotion behind it. It doesn't need to have him watch them constantly like in the book. It's just so good, so good. Um, well, in the remake, I do really like Reba, the blind woman played by Emily Watson in that one, because she's I think because it's playing more with the sensuality of the character as well, but it's not something you see much of in media in general, like disabled people who can have sexual desires for someone,
Yeah.
and the relationship with Dollarhide is very fascinating, the way it plays out. And I mean, Emily Watson is, she's always great. She's like one of those reliable performers, reliable
Yeah.
actors. um, and just with scenes, I mentioned it before in the book. I love the touching the tiger scene. I think it's great. I do really like the supermarket conversation with the kid, with Will Graham's adopted son in Manhunter. Well, in the remake, I just love the encounter, the confrontation that the Dollarhide that Ralph Fiennes has with Freddie Lounds, with Philip Seymour Hoffman. Uh, and that's a character
Yeah.
who's expanded much more in the novel, because you get the backstory to him as well, and he has a wife, and he has hopes and dreams, and he wants to leave the job, but he's a properly good, he's a very very good journalist who's using his power for just greed and horrible clickbait articles essentially that are destroying other people's lives. And Stephen Lang is good in Manhunter, but the way Philip Seymour Hoffman plays him not only is more accurate to the description of him in the novel, but it feels a bit sleazy. And the commitment to actually getting glued to the chair, like you mentioned it, but like you're watching it, it's torture. Like you're feeling it. It feels real because it
Oh,
is real. Like Jesus,
it looks like agony.
yes, I don't envy him. I wonder if he regretted it, like when he had to go to the bathroom or something. It was like, oh
Oh,
shit, shoot it quickly, Brett. Just we have half an hour left, otherwise I'm gonna die here. Um, but yeah, it's a standout moment because it's accurate to the book, of course, but that's where you get two good actors just going for it.
yeah. Oh,
Because
absolutely.
that's when it kind of comes together in an otherwise lackluster film. But speaking of lackluster, Great Expectations. I'll get it over very quickly. Um, Characters, I do. Again, I said it before. I really love Joe in the book. I think Uncle Joe is just good. I was just like, you know what, Pip, you don't deserve him. He's a good man. He basically raised you like a father. Even if you had a horrible sister, he was married to her, and just he's doing his absolute best. And you miserable prick are ungrateful towards him. He changes his mind, of course, but still, it's just kind of like, Uncle Joe is good. He's very very good. I do like Herbert Pocket. in the David Lean version because it's played by Alec Guinness.
Yeah.
And again, for the 1998 version, it still is Joe because it's Chris Cooper. It was like, Chris Cooper, you're trying, and I feel your pain. Just bumbling and moving awkwardly around this ballroom, around this art gallery. Just, man, I feel for you. You're doing your best. Um, the scenes, I like the convict getting arrested in the book, the way they play with like your expectations of what's gonna happen. Like, oh, Pip is fucked now. He's like, no, he gets away scot free because it was good.
Yeah.
Poor Pip, poor Pip. I do really love the ending of 1946 version with like him destroying all the old house, just bringing light back into Estella's life, even though she doesn't deserve it. And as like picking a scene from 1998, hard, really hard. I have to go with the weirdly enough, I have to go with them like when he's painting her because it's weirdly seductive and sensual, but it's like it's taping off Titanic. You said it earlier. It is. It's just copying the paint me like one of your French girls from Titanic, but it's
Yeah.
but it's I like what I like in that one is Ethan Hawke's performance because it's kind of like I'm gonna do as many as I can. She said just very frantic and manic, just painting, just drawing, constantly drawing. It's like 50 different drawings scattered around the room.
It's the sign of a good
Yeah,
artist.
no time to waste.
Quantity.
No time to waste. But
No.
how about you?
Um, as far as favorite characters go, I'm kind of in agreement with you. I do like Pip though, in not young Pip in the David Lean version, and Pip in general in the book. I think it's that clear cut and simplistic rags to riches story that I'm quite fond of. And even though I wasn't too keen on Great Expectations as a book, I do appreciate what Dickens was trying to do. There are solid moments throughout there where Pip is essentially that lost soul that needs a bit of guidance, not from the particularly simplistic and nuclear father figure, but from an outside source. And I do think David Lean manages that quite well. Cuaron tries, bless him. Uh, like the least favorite character, God, where to start? They're all in the '98 version though. Um, I'm always reminded of that scene with Ethan Hawke and Chris Cooper where he's essentially like he's getting ready to go to Gwyneth Paltrow's house for a party, and it's like he's like a jittery teenager, and he's like, "Oh, I'm ready, I'm ready, I'm ready." It's like, all right, just fucking simmer down, man. But that just grated me. I don't think it helps that Robert De Niro was essentially his briefing was just do what you did in Cape Fear, and then stop doing it when I tell you.
Pretty much,
Um,
yeah.
that doesn't help. But I mean, speaking of not helping, as far as favorite scenes go, it's a lot of the stuff in Great Expectations, the David Lean version. It's the moments of sort of quiet contemplation that you have. You have those establishing shots of just far off places where you can see someone running in the background, but the real focus is on the beauty of the area around it. I'm always reminded of the dock scene where you've got Pip running down, but you've actually got the dock itself. Even the graveyard's quite like it has that old style, old school filming on set feel to it. You can tell it's a set, but it is delightful to just look at. As far as least favorite scene goes, probably again the '98 version. I mean, I've already touched on Ethan Hawke acting like a 15-year-old about to go to his first dance.
It's one of many good
I
choices that you can pick.
I don't know what to choose. Is it Robert De Niro trying to drown himself so he can scare a small child? Is it the small child taking him out in a boat and him hiding behind a boy that's just bobbing up and down in front of a police boat? I think it might be the. I was going to say the scene where Ethan Hawke's holding Robert De Niro after he's been stabbed on the subway, because it just looks like Robert De Niro's knackered. He doesn't look dying. He just looks tired.
He's just ready for
I
it.
think my least
He's
favorite.
like, finally,
My
dying.
But if I'm going to include all the technical merits and stuff, it's the painting scene where he's in the apartment with Gwyneth Paltrow, because you have a scene there that could be used as an emotional life jacket. what happens though is that Cuaron's like, all right, time for a needle drop moment, and he plays a song that is from my favorite band, but I would be the first to admit is not a very good song, especially in the context of the film. Um, Inspired lyrics such as "You are the last drink I ever drunk," but it it all plays into
Very
that
thirsty.
cheapness that he. Well, yeah, Cuaron is. Look at that film. It's filth. It's smut.
Oh man, when the kids are
But
kissing near the fountain, just with the,
oh god,
just sucking the
Jesus!
tongue, just like
It's just
they're like 10 years old.
Dickens is just spinning in his grave. Probably, I wouldn't know, but he probably is. That seems like something
We
he'd
should
do
check.
because he couldn't write.
Oh man, oh man. Anyway, yes, like Great Expectations and Red Dragon. What a combo! What a pairing! Both very, very, very easy to find. I would always say that Great Expectations is in the public domain. Like there's a
Probably, yeah.
bajillion
It's about that
copies.
age. Yeah, if Sherlock Holmes is in the public domain, I think Great
I think
Expectations
it's
will
even
be.
earlier, yeah. So then, yeah. And I do believe I was reading online somewhere that you can find some copies of Great Expectations released recently that include the original ending. So if anyone's interested to reading the superior ending, in my opinion, I just read like the summary of it. I didn't actually read it. I was too lazy to find it. But if you want, I would say if you're going to read Great Expectations, pick up the like original version of the ending if possible. And Red Dragon,
Oh,
there's like
definitely.
again like you can find it very cheaply as well right now. It's like £2-3 probably if you were to buy it. Um, Movies, they're on Netflix, they're on all the streaming services, rather easy to find as well. But yes, this combo is going to like the peculiar combo is coming back next month. And originally, I picked actually a Charles Dickens story, but after reading Great Expectations, I do not want to do a Christmas Carol. I'm just like, no, I don't want to put myself through that again. So I decided to stay in line with the holiday spirit. We're going to be talking about Dr. Seuss, How the Grinch Stole Christmas, because
Oh,
something
really? Oh,
lighter. Let's go
actually.
for something lighter. We need it. We deserve
Oh,
it for that. Well, meanwhile, you Ewan, if you don't want to change it at least, you picked The Godfather, which is a
it's a
baller
very
choice.
Christmassy book. Ooh, sorry, I've just looked on Amazon as to how the Grinch Stole Christmas is. £4. Brilliant.
It's a good meal, basically. You can feed off Dr. Seuss.
I'll just eat the food. I'll eat the book as if it's food, like Ralph Fiennes does in Red Dragon. Just munch it down. Delicious.
It's gonna be me with The Godfather. I've already read The
Oh
Godfather,
well,
and I'm excited to dive back into it. And I hope
I've not
go for it.
I've not read it before, but I have just realised it means rewatching The Godfather, and my time these days is rather limited.
Well, that's true.
So
That's true. But I can always find time for The Godfather. Like
oh
any,
yeah, it's a
we
classic.
we already talked about Godfather 3 in September on Uncut Gems, and I did rewatch the second one prior to it. So I have to watch the first one as well. This is a good excuse, a good reason to do it. Finally,
Oh, definitely.
watching the whole trilogy in a very unusual order. But anyway, uh, thank you very much to the good listeners for listening to this episode of Death by Adaptation. Where can our listeners find you, Ewan, on the internet?
They can find me on Cult Following, Spark Sunderland, Newcastle World, Clapper, Geek Show, and I may be back on the radio quite soon.
Ooh,
I don't know when this podcast goes out, but it might be soon. I'm in the middle of recording a demo for a 3 a.m. slot show,
nice.
so it's going to be a bit weird. It's going to be a bit strange, but that was kind of what I was wanting to do.
For the graveyard shift, for those that are working around
Yeah,
the time.
precisely. Yeah, I'm really cornering the Australian demographic. That'll teach them.
All the good songs for the people down under. You can follow me on Twitter at Nikigra97, and there's a Linktree link on Twitter, so just go on Twitter. You can find everything else there. My YouTube channel, Enjoy the Movies. You can find my letterboxd. Of course, you can read my stuff and your stuff on clapperltd.co.uk. I highly, highly recommend you check out the Patreon channel of Clapper and support us there, because it goes a long way for Clapper and all the staff writers with being supported in the writing and the hard work they pull off, like reviews for Clifford the Big Red Dog, the important stuff, proper criticism. Someone has to do it. Someone has to do it.
I have 2 degrees in journalism, and I'm doing reviews of fucking Clifford the Big Red
It all
Dog
led
and
here.
Home Sweet Home Alone.
It all led here,
It-
writing about Disney Plus
I was
originals.
I was gonna win a Pulitzer. I wasn't gonna do reviews of bloody. I'm pretty sure anytime like a shit kids film pops up, I'm like, I can do that. Sure. I was gonna do the Paw Patrol movie, but someone had taken it already. So
They were too quick.
too fast to the slow.
You can. I highly recommend you check out Clappercast as well as the Uncut Gems podcast, which are very much worth a listen. If you want talks about smaller movies and new releases and all that good stuff. And of course, you can follow us, the Death by Adaptation podcast, on Twitter at Death Adaptation Pod, and on Instagram at Death by Adaptation Podcast. Because it's hard to remember those long names sometimes. I get confusing the two of them. But you're gonna find us rather easily. So again, thank you so much for listening. We hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll see you next month. Bye bye.